Hey friends! My name is Desiree, aka Mama Friendly, and I do all sorts of videos on my channel, from cooking videos to planner videos, vlogs, hauls, homeschool videos with a Disney twist, a little bit of everything. So if any of this sounds like fun to you, I hope that you'll subscribe and join me on my YouTube adventure. If you've been following my channel, you already know I eat gluten and dairy-free exclusively, and this year I've been trying to bring more Cuban recipes to my channel because I am in fact Cuban and I really love sharing elements of my heritage and my culture, but there's a lot of traditional foods that I've been missing for a long time because I eat gluten and dairy-free, and a lot of these foods just aren't. So I've been trying to spend the year adapting some of these traditional foods to make them safe for my allergy lifestyle. And today's video was definitely a challenge. I feel pretty good about the final result, but that being said, this is going to be an ongoing experiment, I think. In case you couldn't tell by the title, today I am making gluten-free and dairy-free churros. Now, I feel like churros are something that a lot of cultures have, and everybody has their own spin on it. I've seen bigger ones, smaller ones, some that have lots of cinnamon, some that have just a little, which is how I like them. But churros are just such a typical Cuban food, especially in Miami. I remember growing up, there was a particular bridge that we used to have to drive over on the way back home from school, and there was always a guy with those big styrofoam coolers just hanging off of his neck. He basically made a strap for it, and he would stand on the bridge so that if you got stopped by the red light, you could give him $1 and he'd throw you a brown paper bag full of churros. And now that I'm older, that does sound a little sketch, but I mean, it was a different time. It's just something we've always done. It's street food, man. Cuban people, Hispanic people, we love us our street food. And for $1, you got so many crispy, sugary churros. I'm surprised the school bus driver allowed us to do this actually, because I'm sure we left such a mess in the car constantly. But anyways, it's a food that we all grow up with. The moment the temperature drops below 70 degrees, everybody runs out to their nearest ventanita. Remember I told you guys about ventanitas in an earlier episode of this? Yeah. So everybody runs out to get churros and hot chocolate, and it's just a thing. Cubans love churros. So it only felt right that sooner or later I was gonna come around to this food and try to make it in a way that I could eat it. So now that I've laid down this intro, let's go ahead and see how I did with my gluten and dairy-free churro experiment. As usual, we're starting with our ingredients. First things first, you need a cup plus 2 tablespoons of whatever milk you choose. I'm using my trusty Nut Pods creamer. You also need 7 tablespoons of butter or a non-dairy alternative. I'm using this Miyoko's vegan butter. A cup of gluten-free all-purpose flour, a teaspoon of baking powder, 1.5 tablespoons of sugar, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, although my grandma says the dough's not supposed to have cinnamon, but that's the recipe I'm following. 2 eggs, a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract, a mild high heat oil for frying, and then for dusting afterwards you need a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon and about a 1/2 cup of sugar. As far as our hardware, we've got our measuring spoons and cups and whatnot. I have a candy thermometer for the oil, and then I've got this piping bag set. I'm going to link it down below in the description box in case you want to get it for yourself. I'm going to use 2 different bowls for mixing, and then this very deep Dutch oven for frying. We begin our recipe by mixing our gluten-free flour in a large mixing bowl with our baking powder, salt, cinnamon, and the 1.5 tablespoons of sugar. Now in our saucepan, I'm thinking actually I might not have used 2 bowls. I might have used a bowl and a saucepan. Yes, sorry, I'm doing voiceover after the fact. In this saucepan, we're gonna heat our milk together with the butter, and I'm gonna chop the butter up into smaller pieces to help it melt faster. And we're just gonna heat it gently, and as soon as it starts to boil, we're gonna remove it from the heat. So now we're going to pour our milk and butter mixture into the large mixing bowl that has our flour mixture. Stir it until it's combined. You can use a wooden spoon, you can use an electric mixer. I'm using this silicone spatula so I can make sure to scrape down the sides as I go. We're gonna give this 5 minutes to rest and cool down because our next step is adding in our eggs. So you wanna put in 1 egg, mix it until it's completely incorporated, and then put in the second one and do the same. You can also add your vanilla at this point. The dough is going to be thick and sticky with air pockets, but it shouldn't be so thick that you can't pipe it through the bag. If it is too thick, you can add a little bit more milk, 1 or 2 tablespoons at a time. If it's too thin, then you might want to whisk in a little more flour. Mine was very thin, as we're about to find out, but I didn't want to make any adjustments yet. This is, after all, an experiment. So we're going to go ahead and use this as is. At this point, your batter's ready to fry, or you can cover it and leave it in the fridge for up to 24 hours, but of course, I want to go right now. So I'm filling up my saucepan, or Dutch oven as it were, with about 3 inches of oil, and I'm going to use my candy thermometer to make sure that it gets all the way to 350 Fahrenheit before I start frying. I'm also going to have a plate lined with paper towels off to the side so that as I scoop the churros out of the oil, I can set them to drain on that plate. So I kind of fumbled with the bag a little bit. This was my first time using it. I got the hang of it pretty quickly though. You basically have to put the plastic part, there's 2 plastic parts, one goes over the other. The inner one goes in the bag. Then you put the metal tip over the outside of the bag, so on top of that plastic bit, but with the bag basically between the two. And then the twisty part goes over both of those pieces, and that's what locks it in place. It's probably even more confusing sounding now that I'm saying everything out loud, but trust me, it sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. So I've got a super shallow little bowl here, and this is where I'm gonna put my cinnamon and sugar mixture so that once the churros have come out of the oil and they've drained a little bit, I can toss them in this cinnamon sugar mixture and they will be ready to serve. This is where I probably should have realized that things were not gonna go exactly as I'd hoped. I had chalked it up to, again, this was my first time using this bag, and so maybe I just don't know exactly what I'm doing, but it was extremely hard to get my dough into the piping bag. The bag kept closing in on itself, so maybe it was at least partly the bag, the fact that it was brand new and it had been sealed, like halved basically for so long, but the dough was so thin and so incredibly sticky that it did not help. So it took a bit, but I managed to get everything into the bag, or at least the first batch's worth. And once the oil was at 350, I started to pipe. And as you can see, it's so wet. The dough was not holding its shape at all, but I had already committed. I was already there. So I thought, you know what? The shape is not right. The texture is not right, but let's see about the flavor. Let's see what we can work with. And I'm trying to mix a little bit more flour so that the second batch hopefully is thicker. I'm setting it up here and I'm gonna let it rest to the side while I fry up this first batch. Again, we're learning as we go. This is all an experiment. Stick it in the fridge and let's focus on batch number 1. So this is what the very first churro prototype looked like coming out of the oil here. I'm tossing it in my cinnamon sugar so that we can give it a taste. It looks very fluffy, and it looks like it's gonna be nice and airy on the inside, almost like a donut stick, but yeah, definitely it does not look like a churro just yet. So the prototype was absolutely delicious, and I'm gonna try a second time now. This time I'm using the dough that's been resting in the fridge for maybe like 15 minutes, and it does have slightly more flour than we began with. And you can see that it's only the slightest bit thicker. It's really runny still. It's not holding its shape. So we ended up with more of like a funnel cake situation than a churro situation. Again, the flavor is incredible, and they were still very soft and fluffy on the inside while having that crispy, crusty exterior covered in the cinnamon sugar, of course. It hit the spot as far as a churro craving. But do I feel comfortable saying, hey guys, I perfected Cuban gluten-free churros? Not quite yet. Trying one last time for the day. I did not add any more flour to this, but this has been in the fridge for about 4 or 5 hours now. So I brought the oil back up to temperature, and we're gonna see if it made any difference having it a little bit colder. And again, I don't know if you could really tell the difference as I'm piping it out. Of course, it's still too soft and too loose to keep its shape, but once I take them out of the oil and they're done frying, you can see a marked difference between this batch and the first couple, mostly in the fact that these did manage to hold a little tiny bit of the star shape. So we're not quite there, but we're getting there. So based on that, I think I'm gonna go ahead and put the rest of the dough away overnight. Since the recipe did say you can let it rest in the fridge for up to 24 hours, I'm gonna do just that. I'm gonna give it the 24 hours in the fridge, in the cold, and see if that can't help us kind of set this up, so that hopefully our next attempt, we are that much closer to the signature star shape. Day 2, the dough is in the fridge overnight. Let's see if that helps it keep its shape when we fry it. Going from the very cold fridge into the very hot oil, maybe it'll like shock it into shape, or maybe just the lack of gluten is gonna keep it from ever holding its shape. Either way, it's really, really tasty, but I don't know if it's actually officially a churro, so let's see. So once again, we're bringing our frying oil up to temperature, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. We're gonna go ahead and pipe in our super, super cold batter this time. I don't know if I'd call it a dough. It's more like a batter. And this is very, very quick to make actually. So you only need to fry them for about a minute before you flip them to the other side, and then maybe give them another minute. You're looking for a golden brown color, slightly more brown than golden, but not so brown where they get overcooked. Remember, these are very thin and very delicate, and the idea is to have a crunchy exterior, but still leaving a soft and fluffy interior. So you don't want to cook them all the way through to where the whole thing feels like a breadstick. I feel like these definitely worked out better. You have a lot more definition on the star shape from the piping tip, but they're not just straight like vertical sticks of dough the way you're used to seeing churros. I mean, churros that you make at home are never going to be perfect. They're always going to have their little bit of character. And so I think that these turned out pretty good. Like, I feel comfortable calling these churros at this point. I think that something that I could do differently is maybe use a larger piping tip, because maybe if I have, if they're thicker, obviously it would also help if the dough itself were thicker. So maybe even more flour next time. But I think a thicker churro would give more opportunity for a soft inside, and maybe it would change the texture of the it would definitely change the texture of the final product. But it's just something that I'm still wanting to experiment with. I also made a pas de choux pastry. It was a gluten-free cream puff actually with my son in our Disney homeschool series last year. I'll post that video up in the corner. Churros essentially are a pas de choux, but the recipe I used then, which at least baked was extremely successful, was a little different to this one. So I'm curious if I were to make that pas de choux recipe and try to pipe it with these same bags and fry it, if I would get a more successful churro. So I'm not quite done with my experiment yet, but I feel like I'm on my way, and I'm really excited that I got as far as I did in this attempt. So there you have it, guys. And like I said earlier, they didn't turn out perfect, but I feel good about calling these churros. I feel like the texture was there. The flavor was there. The shape, not quite, but comida casera, man. Like anything you make at home is gonna have its own like quirk to it, you know? So you can't expect it to look perfect. I do want to keep trying, like I said, that pâte choux recipe that I tried once before. I know baked, it's perfect. So I'm wondering if I fry it, how that would turn out, how that would change. I'm also curious about using a larger piping star to see how that changes the texture. And maybe even a different gluten-free flour, maybe just using more flour. Like there's so many ways that I can keep playing around with this, but even just as it was, I feel good about where we ended up with this recipe. If you've ever made gluten-free and dairy-free churros, I know it's kind of a stretch, but if you ever have, I would love to hear about your experience and let me know what you did differently that maybe I could try to incorporate in my next attempt. I think there's definitely gonna have to be a part 2 to this video as I keep trying things out and maybe hopefully end up stumbling onto the perfect method. And if you decide to try this recipe, I would love for you to come on back and let me know how it works out for you. And as always, if there's a particular Cuban food that you'd like to see me try to adapt, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Who knows, you might see it on the channel one of these days. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, I hope that you will please give it a big thumbs up. I'd also love it if you would subscribe and click that notification bell because I post at least 3 times a week and I wouldn't want you to miss a minute. Thanks so much again for watching. Bye!